Welcome to the deep dive, where we try to get past the surface noise. You've seen them everywhere, right? Online, maybe on TV. These big public debates between believers and
Oh
non-believers.
yeah, they're hard to miss. And they always seem set up for, a big showdown, a clear winner.
Exactly. But what if that whole setup is flawed? What if these clashes actually obscure more than they reveal?
Well, that's exactly the idea we're jumping into today. It's a really compelling perspective from Skylar Fiction. We're looking at their manifesto, Debating Atheists Won't Save Your Soul.
Right, and also some bits from their sermon, Your God is Too Small. Powerful titles.
Definitely. And our goal really is to unpack Fiction's argument. They argue that a lot of traditional apologetics, defending the faith in debates, is basically stagecraft.
Stagecraft,
Like,
like a performance.
precisely. Reducing these huge, messy human experiences, pain, doubt, wonder down to logical arguments, syllogisms, it's all very performative.
So, our mission today is to explore why fiction thinks this approach doesn't really, well, doesn't save souls, not the debaters, not the audiences, and importantly, what a more maybe authentic approach might look like.
Okay, let's get into it.
So, fiction starts right off calling these debates an illusion, even stagecraft. Tell me more about that stagecraft idea. What does that really capture?
It's such a vivid term, isn't it? Fiction paints this picture. Two podiums, one audience. 1,000 lives of pain, trauma, doubt, and wonder reduced to a debate over syllogisms. It immediately makes you think of theater,
Yeah.
not genuine encounter.
Right, less connection, more spectacle.
Exactly. And they point to those viral clips, the ones Christian destroys atheist or atheist crushes Christian. They get tons of views. Sure, definitely clicks.
But fiction observes, does anyone actually change their fundamental beliefs because of them? Usually not. People often just dig their heels in deeper on whatever side they were already on. That resonates way beyond just religious debates, actually. Politics, social issues, anywhere, performance trumps understanding.
It's a widespread pattern. And fiction really hammers this point home.
Yeah.
You don't find God through a syllogism, these formal logical arguments.
Like the Kalam cosmological argument or the fine-tuning argument.
Yeah, those kinds of things. Fiction says, look, no addict breaks their chains because of a Kalam argument. No grieving mother finds real peace from the fine-tuning argument. These aren't answers to deep existential pain.
So the arguments might be intellectually interesting, but they don't touch the core human need.
That seems to be the point. Which leads to fiction's pretty blunt conclusion. Debating atheists won't save your soul, and sure as hell won't save theirs.
Wow. Okay. That's a direct hit on the whole enterprise for a lot of people.
It really challenges the perceived value of that kind of engagement, especially if spiritual transformation is the goal. Winning the argument might mean losing something deeper.
And this idea that debates don't save souls connects directly to fiction's next point, right? About the kind of God being defended.
Yes, exactly. Fiction argues that the God defended in many of these debates is, and this is their phrase, simply too small.
Too small. What does that look like?
Well, fiction uses some pretty intense imagery. They talk about a cosmic accountant keeping score of sins, weighing belief like a credit score.
Okay, that's quite picture.
And a God who supposedly sends children to burn in fire forever if they die in the wrong zip code or read the wrong book. It's a harsh critique of certain doctrines.
Yeah, very harsh. Fiction also describes this God as fragile, jealous, easily offended, almost like a bigger, meaner version of you.
Right. And maybe looking, as they put it, suspiciously like a tribal king from the Iron Age.
It's definitely a provocative characterization. Is fiction suggesting all concepts of God are like this, or is this aimed at a specific type of theology?
It really seems aimed at a particular, often more rigid or fundamentalist interpretation. The idea is that many atheists aren't rejecting God per se, but this specific, maybe diminished version of God.
Because your God is too small, as the sermon title says.
Exactly, a God who's, predictable, easily offended, more concerned with being right than being known. Fiction calls this God a theological algorithm, a prison warden, a heavenly accountant.
And there's that other line, too, an all-powerful ego with daddy issues and a thing for blood. Very strong language.
Very. It's clearly meant to provoke thought about the image of God being presented and defended.
Which then sets up that killer question from the sermon. If your God can be destroyed by a YouTube debate, then she was never God to begin with.
Yeah, that just stops you in your tracks, doesn't it? It forces you to ask what or who you're actually defending.
And this leads to a really important nuance in fiction's argument.
Right. That maybe most atheists aren't rejecting God, they're rejecting your doctrine of him. It's a shift in perspective. The rejection isn't necessarily of the divine itself, but of harmful or unbelievable interpretations of the divine.
That feels like a critical distinction, and fiction gives examples of doctrines people might be rejecting.
They do. Very tough examples, like a God who supposedly watches starving children die, or one who demands worship under threat and calls painful abandonment love just to test someone's faith.
These are the kinds of sticking points that really cause people to lose faith, aren't they? Deep disillusionment.
Absolutely. Or the idea of a God who damns the Buddhist monk for being born in the wrong place while rewarding the megachurch pastor with private jets and dead-eyed sermons.
Oh.
And even referencing biblical stories like the God who flooded the world, killed every child, and told Noah it was all part of the plan. And then fiction adds, very personally.
And to be honest, so am I. Meaning, they also reject that version of God.
Yeah. It's a raw moment of honesty. It shows this isn't just an abstract critique for fiction, it's personal. It touches on their own spiritual journey.
So, okay, fiction has torn down the idea of debate as salvation and critiqued this small God. Where do they go from there? Is there an alternative vision offered?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just critique. Fiction shares their own belief in a very different kind of God, having rejected that small version themselves.
And what does this bigger God look like, according to fiction?
This is a God who bleeds with us, who hides in silence, who rises not in conquest, but in crushed bodies and broken bread. It's much more about shared suffering and quiet presence than power and control.
That sounds completely different. More poetic, almost mystical, like the God who is the sea and the stars and the ache in your chest when someone leaves and never comes back.
Right, it's expansive, visceral, a God you can't systematize, because this God is the system, the breath behind every equation. It's a move away from intellectual frameworks.
So the core shift is what? How do you relate to this kind of God?
Fiction puts it simply. You don't need to prove her. You need to perceive her. It's about awareness, perception, experience.
Not argument.
Not argument. The sermon says this is a God who doesn't fit in a systematic theology book, one you don't argue for, because you can feel her in the spaces between the questions.
Okay, I think I get that. It's more intuitive, maybe? Felt rather than proven.
Exactly. And this God, crucially, doesn't need your defense. Why? Because, in fiction's words, she defends the widow, the orphan, and even your loud, cursing, unbelieving heart when it collapses at 3 a.m.
From an abstract concept to a compassionate presence, that's a huge shift.
It really is. And it leads perfectly into this analogy fiction uses about the soul.
Right, the courtroom versus the garden. Can you unpack that?
Sure. Fiction says apologists, the debaters, often treat the soul like a courtroom. They're looking for evidence, burden of proof, cross-examinations. It's adversarial.
Okay, I see the parallel, logic, evidence, winning the case.
But fiction counters, the soul isn't a trial, it's a garden.
A garden? That changes everything. What does that imply?
Well, think about it. You don't argue a seed into growing. You don't logic a river into flowing. You don't convince a thunderstorm to weep on cue. These things just happen. They unfold.
So it's about cultivation, nurturing, allowing, not forcing.
Exactly. It suggests that connecting with the sacred, or fostering spiritual growth, isn't about winning an argument. It's about creating the right conditions. It's about being present.
You just listen. You just beat it. That line stood out. The sacred doesn't show up for the clever. It shows up for the present.
Yes. Presence over cleverness. Being over arguing. It's a fundamentally different approach.
How does this view line up with, say, the figure of Jesus? Many look to him as an example. Did he operate like these debaters' fiction critiques?
According to fiction's reading, not at all. Jesus didn't argue the Sadducees into belief. He didn't rely on logic bombs.
So what did he do instead?
Well, fiction points out he wept. He told stories. He made mud and touched blind eyes. His methods were relational, embodied, often mysterious.
Parables, not proofs.
Right. He dropped parables that only made sense if you were paying attention with your heart. And the standard he set wasn't intellectual. He never said, you will know them by their syllogisms.
He said, you'll know them by their love.
Exactly. Love is the evidence, the fruit.
And the sermon reinforces this.
Very much so. It says Jesus didn't present syllogisms about his resurrection. He knelt in dirt. He cried at funerals. He told stories that made people uncomfortable and then walked away. The call is to look at the outcome, the impact.
You want truth. Look at the fruit. Look at the love. Not the logic, not the likes, not the latest podcast dunking on atheists. That's pretty direct.
It is. It's a call away from online point scoring towards tangible, lived love and compassion.
So bringing this all together, what's the takeaway for someone listening? It sounds like a call to change how we approach faith itself.
I think so. It's a challenge, really.
Yeah.
Fiction insists God does not need defenders. She is not on trial. She is not insecure. She doesn't need a YouTube thumbnail to prove she's real.
So stop defending and start.
Start embodying. Start perceiving. Where is God actually found, according to fiction? Not in the debate hall, but she is the flame burning in every refugee camp, the silence in every cancer ward, the joy in every autistic child's laugh.
Wow.
The soft whisper in your chest at 2 a.m. saying, I'm still here. It's about recognizing God as a presence, not reaching God as a conclusion.
So this leads to a kind of new apologetics, one that's not about defense.
Exactly. One focused on awe rather than arguments, on presence over persuasion, on embodying faith rather than just proving doctrines.
And the message changes too.
Completely.
Right.
It's not I win, you lose. It's I don't need to win this debate. I just need you to know you're seen, you're loved, you are not alone. It's about connection, not conquest.
That connects to another challenging line from the sermon about faith versus anxiety.
Ah, yes. If your faith depends on proving God exists, then maybe you don't have faith. Maybe you just have anxiety with verses taped to it.
That's quite the gut check for people who feel they need proof.
It suggests that true faith might lie beyond the need for certainty. That truth isn't always something you can say. Sometimes it's something you become. Lived truth, not just intellectual agreement.
Okay, so this feels like it's building towards a really radical rethinking of faith. Fiction talks about a new reformation.
Yeah, moving beyond historical Reformation slogans. Not sola scriptura, scripture alone, but maybe sola mysterium.
By mystery alone.
Exactly. And not just by faith alone, but by faith made flesh and love. It's about embodiment, relationship, embracing the unknown.
And this leads back to the core paradox.
Debating atheists won't save your soul. But letting go of your need to win might. It's the letting go, the surrender of the need to be right that might actually open the door to growth.
The sermon has a kind of altar call for this.
Sort of, yeah. A call towards a faith that doesn't need to win, a God that doesn't need to be right, a soul that doesn't need to be certain, just open.
Certainty replaced by openness, that's a big shift.
Huge. And the path, not more arguing. Fiction suggests maybe shutting up and listening will.
Ha! In this noisy world, that feels revolutionary. Just listening.
And connecting. Maybe looking someone in the eye, someone who doesn't believe a single word you do, and still seeing God in their breath. Maybe that's where the kingdom lives.
Wow. Finding the sacred in the connection itself, even across disagreement.
It's not improving, but in presence. Not in argument, but in awe. That seems to be the heart of it.
It's an invitation, then, to encounter God differently.
Yes, to receive the one who was always too big to fit inside your argument, too wild to be caged by certainty, too intimate to be proven. And the assurance is
She's still here.
she's still here, and she's waiting for you in the quiet after the debate ends, when the lights go off and the applause fades.
That's a really powerful place to land. So this deep dive has taken us through Skylar Fiction's argument against performative debate, against defending a small God, and towards a faith rooted in mystery, presence, love, and embodiment.
A huge shift from intellectual battles to, well, something much more like tending a garden, like being truly present with each other and with the mystery itself.
Right. And we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on straight from fiction. God is not the answer to the debate. She is the question that burns until you awaken.
So maybe consider, what does it mean for you to encounter the sacred not through logic or needing to be right, but through openness, through awe, maybe in places and people you least expect?
I love the Skylar Fiction Show.